An Australian adventurer, writer, and environmentalist, Huw Kingston has spent over 30 years undertaking long human-powered journeys in wild places across the world. He has numerous awards to his name, including the Australian Geographic Spirit of Adventure Award, and was named one of Time magazine's 25 worldwide responsibility pioneers for his long-term work to reduce plastic pollution. Huw is also an ambassador for Save the Children Australia and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. Huw had a long-standing love affair with the Indian Himalayas for 20 years from the mid-80s. This included numerous pioneering ski touring journeys such as skiing from Kashmir to Kulu in 1991. He is very much looking forward to putting some of those journeys in the modern context of adventure tourism at the 2019 ATOAI convention. So please bring your hands together for Mr. Huw Kingston, our keynote addressee for the day.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Can I have... I don't need actually the slides to tell you that 2 days ago I left Australia. I left a very traumatized nation. So congratulations, India, in the cricket. But we Australians, we have a plan. We have a plan. We know what to do when we can't win. We take a cricket ball and we take sandpaper and we rub it together. So watch out, India. Next time we're coming for you. We're coming for you. Are we good to go there now? Talk amongst yourselves. The best laid plans. The best laid plans. Maybe I'll go off stage and come back on again. I can start, but it would be good to have some visuals to do it with. Okay, what I'm going to do, because we'll get to the visuals when they come up, but this is the first day of the convention. This is the thing that kicks it off. It's magic to be back in India for me. It's magic to be in Andrapradesh. But this is an adventure tourism conference. So what I want you to do is we're going to go for a bit of an adventure statically, relatively statically. So I'll just get you all to stand up if you would. On your feet. Have we got any kayakers or rafters in the audience? We must. It's an adventure trail. Put your hand up if you're a paddler. Yeah, good. All right, well, when they find I do have some vision of paddling, but what I want you to do, let's go for a bit of a kayak. Come on, dig it in, come on. Those rafters, it's lovely people who are sitting in the seats. There is a small kayak under one of your seats. And there's a very fine gift if the kayak is under your seat. So take a look. Anyone got it? If it's not under your seat, if there's empty seats near you, it could be there. There's definitely one there. Come on, kayakers, come on, paddlers. You know, this is the furthest south I've ever been in India. I've always been north. I've been to Mumbai. Ah, there you are, there you are. Congratulations, India. We can start. We can begin. But if we can't beat you at cricket, I think you would all agree that Australia has the finest mountains in the world. Yeah? I mean, what has India got by way of mountains? Look at that. Look at that for Australia. We can move on from the next one because you've already gone for a paddle, so we don't need to worry about that. As I said, it is an absolute honour and a pleasure to be back in India. And up until last month, I actually hadn't been in India for 10 years. And I came back last year to Adventure Next, to address Adventure Next India in Bhopal, and that was the first time back to India in 10 years. And the last time I was in India was in 2008. And in 2008, the last trip I was on, I was doing a mountain bike race in Himachal Pradesh from Shimla to Manali. And it was about the 8th or 9th day of that mountain bike race. And I came flying down this hill on this very rough track, somewhere near, I can't even remember where it was, Jalori Pass, I think. Come flying down this rough track, and there in front of me, in the middle of the track, is a god. Now, I don't know any country in the world where you have a god on the track when you're in a mountain bike race. And I did my best to avoid hitting this god, but Reinhardt behind me, he wasn't so lucky, and he clipped the god, and that's how he ended up. And of course the god was being carried from the villages in the Kulu district down to the Dussehra, along with hundreds of other gods from the villages. And I wondered after that whether a curse had somehow been put upon me that I couldn't come back to India because I almost hit one of your gods. So it is good and it's wonderful to be here. And it was wonderful, as I say, to be in Madhya Pradesh and now in Andrapradesh, Madhya Pradesh for Adventure Next India. And to come back to India, a country that's been so important in my own adventuring life. And when I was here in December addressing Adventure Next, it was great to reconnect with old friends, some I hadn't seen for some decades. Many of you will know Mandip Singh Swan from Ibex Expeditions. Mandip, a very dear old friend of mine. It was great to see him again. It was great to meet new people, new legends like Akshay Kumar, who you've already seen up on the stage. I'd never met Akshay before, but last month I spent a few days rafting the mighty Ganga with Akshay. And then through Akshay, I get to meet an even bigger legend than himself, and that's his father, of course, Colonel Bull Kumar, one of the absolute legends of Indian mountaineering. And I was honored and blessed to celebrate the 85th birthday with Colonel Kumar and all his family last month in Rishikesh. And you get all of those connections happening in the adventure game, because through meeting Colonel Kumar, it reminded me of one of my dearest friends here in India, and that's one of India's, again, pioneering and strongest ever mountaineers, and a man for whom I have immense respect as an adventurer and a climber, and Colonel Prem Chand. So, great to be back. But when I first came to India, it was 1984. I was a young man then, 22 years old, and I hated it. I hated it. It was the worst, and it remains the worst trip that I've ever done in my life. And in 1984, I said, I am never going to come back to India again in my life. And sometimes you make those rash decisions in youth, and they don't really last too long. I mean, I didn't like beer when I first tasted it, but that changed fairly soon after. And in 1987, I was in Australia for the first time. I'm actually originally from the UK. I moved to Australia about 30 years ago. And I was visiting Australia just to have a look, to travel, to climb, to kayak, and whatever. And an Australian man said to me, he said, look, we're going to the Kulu district in Manali to do some a bit of skiing, maybe to try and climb a few peaks in the Manali district. Would you like to come? And I thought, no, 1984 wasn't very good. But anyway, I said yes. And I had the most spectacular 3-month journey and my first introduction to what are, after Australia, some of the finest mountains in the world, the mighty Himalaya. And it really was, for me, a life-changing moment, that journey. As I say, I was still fairly young then, my mid-20s, and it developed in me a love of the Himalaya, a love of the Indian Himalaya. I've never been to Nepal. I've only ever come to the Indian Himalaya. And it developed in me a love of long, human-powered journeys, which has been a mark of my life for some decades now. And on that journey in 1987, we didn't manage to climb any peaks. It was March, it was winter, it was too early. But we skied over the Rotang Pass, and we skied up into the Andrapradesh and over the Hamta Pass. I think this is a camp on the Hamta Pass. Just these beautiful, beautiful mountains. No one around, no one skiing around. Obviously, at the time, fairly pioneering stuff. And that love for me in 1987 brought me back again the next year, and the next year again in 1989, when I came and skied again over the Rotang, up to Kailong in Lahau, around to the Baralachala, down to Chandatal, up to the Kunzumla, back down, back over the Hamta, and I was absolutely loving being on skis in winter in the mountains. And I decided then to start planning a journey to see if we could ski from the Kashmir Valley to the Kulu Valley. And we planned a route, did a little bit of reconnaissance the year before in 1990. And the idea was that we would leave Lehinvan in the Kashmir Valley, we'd try and ski over five high passes as it turns out, and make our way through Kishtwar, through Zanskar, through Lahau, and into Kulu Manali district. And one of the things, I guess, that has been a constant in my life over the last 30 years or so is that I still fall down. And there I am, lying down in the snow in 1990, and there I am last year in Tajikistan, in the Fan Mountains in Central Asia, lying down. I still can't help but fall. I think it's the story of most skiers. Are there any skiers in the audience? It's hard to see. Who skis? There's a few. There's a few. It's a bit hard to talk about skiing down in Andrapradesh. But I will leave that slide there for a moment, because lying down has become a key part of my expeditions and my journeys. And as a 15-year-old, I broke my back in the UK when I was a schoolboy. I fell off a bridge onto a road about 10 meters below and broke my back. And I had some problems then through my teenage years and into my 20s. But I was determined that once I discovered adventure, that this problem was not going to stop me. But what happened in 1991 was the start of something that's happened almost without exception in all of my journeys, not only in the Himalaya, but around the world. And about 2 weeks before I left to come to India to do the Kashmir to Kulu ski traverse, I put my back out. And I was lying on my bed in Australia. By then I'd moved to Australia, and thinking, I've been planning this journey for a couple of years. Can I go? You know, I can't go in this state. What am I going to do? I said to myself, I need to get to India. I need to get to India and see what happens. So I made my way from Sydney to Delhi, and from Delhi to Srinagar. And for 2 weeks, I lay on a houseboat in Srinagar. And for 2 weeks, I just saw this journey and this expedition disappearing in front of me. All of this planning, everything that I'd done. And again, I said to myself, I need to get to the beginning point of this journey. It doesn't matter how much pain I'm in, I need to get to the start of this journey. And I got to the start of that journey in the Kashmir Valley, and I set off with my 3 companions. And we ended up in those first days in the most appalling avalanche valley, one of the worst valleys I've skied in for avalanche danger. And for some days after crossing the Margan Pass, we were just having these avalanches coming down in front of us and behind us as we were skiing along. And I totally forgot about the problems that I had with my back. And I continued on, and 35 days later, after this magnificent journey through the Indian Himalayas, came out into the Manali, into the Kulu Valley. And it truly was a very special journey in so many ways, and so many wonderful things happened and people that we met, people who hadn't seen anybody for 6 months of the year since the passage had been closed. And I remember an amazing morning when we were skiing. We'd come off the Peninsula in Zanskar, and we were heading towards Padum. And in a small village above us, up on the valley side, and early in the morning I just saw these little figures coming down, quite speedily down from this village. And within a few minutes, we had around us about a dozen small Zanskari children from the village. And all of them were wearing these skis that were made from plastic pipe, 2-centimeter diameter plastic pipe, bound together with wire, and then the wire going over their felt boots. And it was just a very special time. We called them the Zanskari National Ski Team. And you know, these guys hadn't really seen ski touring. To the best of my knowledge, only one other person had been through that valley on skis, and that was about 6 years before. So meeting those people, showing the monks in places like Rangdam Gompa how skis worked, you know, it was just a really fabulous journey. And we made our way, as I say, we got to Padum, and we got up to the Kangla. And the Kangla on the Kashmir to Kulu ski traverse was the highest point that we got to, about 5,700 meters. And we got there on a beautiful day. But when we got down off the pass and we camped on the glacier, the weather came in, and it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed. And I remember sitting there in the tent, or lying down in the tent, for 4 days and 4 nights, just waiting and waiting and waiting, listening to the avalanches come down. And by then we'd pretty much run out of food, and the photograph on the right here is of Megan coming from her tent that she shared with Jamie to my tent with Carol, my partner, and she was bringing the last half packet of glucose biscuits to our tent to give us the last bit of food that we had left. And the next morning we was pretty starving and decided that whatever the weather, we're going to head down. We're going to head down to try and reach the first village in the Mia Nullah. And after about 12, 13 hours, we got down to Kanjar, I think it was, the name of the village. And all of the village came out to welcome us and say, you know, where have you come from? We don't normally see anybody come from that direction at this time of year. And the village headman took us into his house. And as soon as we sat down, the ladies of the house started pouring the local chang, the local beer. And as soon as we took a drink from the glass, the lady would fill it up again. And we'd take a drink, the lady would fill it up again. There was no, you couldn't even get to the bottom of the glass. Now we were absolutely starving, but still no food came out. The village headman had said, we're going to feed you, but still no food came. And we were getting more and more drunk as the night went on. And about midnight, I said to the village headman, is it possible? Is it possible? Is dinner going to happen? Is there any food? And the village headman said, but Mr. Huw, of course, you are our honoured guests. You are here for dinner. But it is a tradition of our village, of our people, that we never mix alcohol with food. And unless you aggressively refuse the alcohol, we will drink all night and you won't eat. We stopped drinking and we finally got to eat. And after that journey from Kashmir to Kulu in 1991, I came back pretty much every year to your Himalaya, to these magical mountains that are almost as good as our mountains in Australia. And I came back to do ski tours, to do bike tours, to do some trekking, and I ended up doing some bike races, as I mentioned earlier in the talk, there too. I even ran a couple of commercial ski trips. I brought Australians and British people to come and do some ski touring in the Kulu Manali district. And we did some wonderful trips around there, you know, for a week or so. Just some of the best ski touring in the world. And you know, we'd go up from Jagat Sukh, near Manali, we'd head up towards ATOAI, those who know the Himalaya, and then we'd go over this little notch behind the tents here called Guru Pass, down into the Malana Valley, and out to the very fascinating village of Malana. And I remember one trip, I had a group of skiers from the UK with me, and we were doing this trip, and when we left from Jagat Sukh, this dog followed us. Now, I don't like animals that much, if the truth be known, and I'm not a very good dog person or cat person. But this dog came with us for the first day, and when we camped near the trees, near where the snow started, we threw snowballs at this dog to try and send it home, but the dog wouldn't go, and the next morning the dog was there. And it came with us further up the valley. We threw more snowballs, but the dog wouldn't go. And eventually we decided we would just give it some porridge. We had a little bit of spare porridge, we could feed this dog. And this dog came with us for about 10 days through the mountains. Came up over the Guru Pass there at 5,000 meters. And I still, one of those classic memories for me of skiing in the Indian Himalaya was doing my telemark turns down off that pass with this dog jumping back and forth across the front of my skis. Absolutely beautiful. A lovely dog, and it's the only dog in my life that I've actually fallen in love with. And one of the amazing things that I think with that dog was that when we finished that tour and went away, I got a message from some British skiers who we'd seen in Manali before we started this trip, and I told them about this trip, and they set off about a week or so after we'd finished, and they sent me some photographs of this same dog skiing all the way with them. Exactly the same dog. So I'm convinced somehow this dog that actually left us in Malana, it disappeared to go and play with other dogs. It made its own way back over the Chandakani Pass to Jagat Sukh, and then waited for the next ski touring group to come by and follow it all the way around. Beautiful, beautiful dog. But after 12 or 15 years of this time enjoying your beautiful mountains, it was time for me to discover another country, my new home country of Australia. The country with, I think you'd all agree, probably the best mountains in the world. And I decided that maybe the best way to see Australia was to go between each of our state capitals by following the most interesting and challenging human-powered route, going through the best mountains, the best deserts, down the best rivers, and kayaking along the best coastline. And this project became what I call City to City, and ultimately was 25,000 kilometers and 543 days of kayaking, of walking, of skiing, of biking, and so on. And again, it was a magical way to explore my new country. What a way to see the best of Australia. But on most of those journeys, most of those 7 journeys, that back problem of mine would happen again. 2 weeks, a month before I'd leave on those trips, my back would go, and I'd be lying flat on my back thinking, here we go again. How am I going to get to the beginning of this trip? And I developed this mantra that I get to the start line. I get to the start line of this journey, and then we'll see what happens. And it seemed to work then, through the 90s, into the 2000s. Somatic is psychosomatic in my head, but that's the story of nearly all of my expeditions now, since that first Kashmir to Kulu one nearly 30 years ago. It's a game that my head plays with me, with my body. But India, once you've been here, it doesn't let you go. Yeah? India draws people back. And okay, I might not have wanted to come back that first time, but I knew that I'd be coming back again sometime. And in 2008, 4 of us had this amazing expedition planned in Tibet. And this journey in the Kunlun Mountains in western Tibet was to try and ski across what is the highest area of land above 6,000 meters for about 200 kilometers. And no one had done it before, no one had been through there. And we had this trip planned, we had some great sponsorship, some lovely backing, and we had these really important permits from the Chinese government. And then, 6 weeks before the journey, there were riots in Lhasa, and there were problems in Urumqi, and the Chinese government didn't want these people coming in there, and so they pulled our permits. So we couldn't go on that journey. And so there we were, 4 people with 2 months of spare time. And the other 3 said, well, Huw, we've never been to the Indian Himalaya. Why don't we go there? You've been a few times. And I said, look, guys, I'm happy to go back to India. I haven't been for 10 years. I'm really happy to go back. But I want to do something different. I want to do something, go to a place that I've never been to before. And so we planned this journey from Kinawa, from the Sutlej Valley, to ski and make our way to Gangotri and up to Tapavan. And it was, again, a beautiful journey. And of course, 2 weeks, a month before that journey, my back went. And I lay in bed in Australia thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm going to get to the start line. And we had a fantastic time, and does anyone know what this mountain is? Kalanag. As part of this journey from Kinawa, we skied up this beautiful peak, about 6,500 meters. Great ski mountain, Kalanag, Black Peak, and just wonderful, wonderful times again. And for me, it was after pretty much 10 years since I'd last skied in the Indian Himalaya. It was a great chance to come back. It was a great, wonderful time to reconnect with these pretty fabulous mountains that you have in the northern part of this country. And we went over passes like Rupin Pass and Valley Pass, and I think the photo on the left is skiing down in some nice powder snow, but very poor visibility off Rupin Pass, about 5,000 meters. And then the photo on the right is coming up over the Valley Pass and then down to Yamunotri. And after that journey in 2008, I stepped away from India once again. And then, for me, it was time to go back to Europe and reconnect with my old continent, if you like, away from Australia, my new continent. And I decided that I was going to spend a year circumnavigating the Mediterranean Sea from a place called Gallipoli in Turkey. And Gallipoli, most of you probably won't know, some of you will, is a very, very important place for Australian people. In the First World War, 10,000 Australian soldiers died on the beaches in Gallipoli, and that was the first time that Australia, as an independent nation, went to war. And we celebrate Anzac Day on the 25th of April, each year, and it's our biggest ever commemoration day. And when I talk about Commemoration Day, I think it's worth remembering I'm really excited on this trip, because next week is Australia Day, which is on the 26th of January, which also happens to be, I think, a fairly big day in India, so we share another great day. But Anzac Day, the 25th of April, big commemoration day. So I wondered, could I start in Gallipoli in Turkey on Anzac Day 2014 and get around by sea kayak, by foot, by bike, and, as it turned out, by ocean rowboat, back to Gallipoli in time for the commemoration service on the beach in 2015, the centenary, when there would be 10,000 people commemorating that tragedy on the beach. And my journey around the Mediterranean Sea exceeded expectations on every single level. For me, it was an incredibly physical journey. I'm not a young man anymore, so things hurt like those sort of journeys. But it was a journey of 14,000 kilometers through 17 countries that took in some of the best seascapes and landscapes on the shores of the Mediterranean, Mediterranean Europe and Mediterranean North Africa. I went away from the shores a little bit. Part of my journey was a 3-month trek across the whole of the European Alps, which after India and after Australia are some of the most beautiful mountains in the world. And this is the day on part of that trek when I climbed to the summit of Mont Blanc, the highest mountain in Europe. A mere 4,800 meters. It's nothing to you fine Indians, but to an Australian for whom our highest mountain is 2,200 meters is quite a big mountain. So it was a very special journey, and like most journeys, the landscape is so important. But if my journeys were human-powered, it's the power of human kindness that nourishes those journeys time and time and time again. You know, the vast majority of the people, when we look at the problems around the world, they're normally caused by a small number of people, and the vast majority of people in any country around the world, wherever you go to Syria, you go to Iraq, you come to India, you go to Italy, you go to Australia, the vast majority of the people in the world are good people, are kind people, are generous people. But, of course, before I set off on that whole year, where I was putting my life on hold for a year, my business on hold, I said goodbye to my wife and my 5 beautiful grandchildren for a year. I had all these sponsors. I was fundraising for Save the Children, a charity which I'm very heavily involved in and was mentioned that I'm an ambassador for. And a month before I set off to go to Turkey to start that journey, my back went. And I lay on my bed in Australia and said, I will get to the start line. Nothing's going to stop me. And the night before I started that journey at Gallipoli, I lay on a hotel bed in Çanakkale, near Gallipoli, the nearest town in the Dardanelles in Turkey. And my friend, my Italian friend Eleanor, who was with me, she was massaging my back and I was crying. I was sobbing tears into the pillow of my bed, seeing my journey disappear in front of me, because the next day I knew how could I start in the state that I was? But you get to the start line. All you really need is to get to the start line. You get yourself on the start line and you begin, because the fear of failure, the fear of something happening along the way, the fear of being unable to complete it, disappears to a very large extent once you've actually started a very long journey, and you know that things will change. You know, I mean, there is no point on a journey of this length to try and plan every route, every day. It's a belief in yourself, it's a belief in the wonderful help that you will receive from other people along the way, both known and unknown. When things don't go right, when you have a problem physically, when you might have a problem, where you're feeling a bit down, you know it won't last forever. It's just keep plugging away. So it was another fine journey. And I guess, like many of this wonderful audience, as an adventurer, as a travel writer, I've been blessed to deeply experience some incredible parts of this special and probably unique little planet. And that's driven me in very small ways as an individual to try and effect change. I mentioned the work that I do with Save the Children. But something I've long been involved with, and something that's very current and has already been talked about tonight, is the issue of plastic pollution. And in the Mediterranean Sea, plastic pollution is utterly utterly out of control. And this is a beach in Albania, but it could be a beach in any of the countries that border the Mediterranean. It could be a beach in many countries around the world, and it could certainly be a beach here in India. And I think we all understand the size of the problem, the scale of the problem. And certainly on the sea, the biggest thing you see is the plastic bottle. And the biggest thing in there is the plastic water bottle. And, you know, wherever you go in the world, you find this problem. And I think, whilst it's maybe over-talked about now, and you're probably all a little sick of hearing about the problems of plastic, in this audience it's really, really important, because the places that we love, the places that I want to go to, are in danger of being places that I don't want to go to anymore because of the problems of plastic pollution. There's other issues too, of over-tourism and whatever, but the pollution that exists wide and is impacting now on people's wish to go to certain places. As I say, the fight against single-use plastics is a fight that I've long been engaged with. And I come from a small town now in Australia. I've lived there for 25 years, a small town called Bundanoon. And does anyone, I know there's a few in the audience, who knows Gary Weir? There's a few of you out there. Gary Weir is, certainly outside of India, is one of the gurus of trekking in the Indian Himalaya. And it just so, and I think about 5 or 6 years ago, he gave a keynote address to this very same convention when it was held in Kashmir, in Srinagar. And Gary now is a good friend of mine, and he lives just by chance in the same small village as I do. And that small village I made 10 years ago the first town in the world, it says Australia, but the first town in the world to stop the sale of bottled water, water in plastic bottles. And so we commemorate 10 years of doing that this year, and I now continue and I work on that around the world. I work with a lot of towns and organisations, universities, etc., on the problem of bottled water. And this is Gary and me last week in Bundanoon. And Gary, as I say, is a bit of a guru of the Indian Himalaya. And I first met Gary under less than pleasant circumstances, because I was over here in India trekking, looking at some passes that I might try and ski over in the winter. And I wanted to ski over a pass called the Chilung La in Kishtwar. So we looked for it when we were trekking, and the only information I had was that in the Lonely Planet Guide to Trekking in the Indian Himalaya, written by one Gary Weir, it said, once you're on the glacier, easy glacial walking leads to the pass. So we thought, easy glacial walking leads to the pass. Fabulous. For 4 days, we looked for the pass on the glacier. For 4 days, we went to every notch up on the glacier looking for the Chilung La, and looked down, not from a pass, but at a 500-meter ice fall or whatever. And so ultimately, we gave up and we went back all the way back down to Kishtwar, and we never found the Chilung La. And straight after that trip, I was actually emigrating to Australia from the UK. And I went into the office of World Expeditions. Gary was one of the founders of what was originally Australian Himalayan Expeditions. Some of you will know the company. Is now World Expeditions, a fairly big adventure travel company worldwide. So I went into the office in Sydney and I said to the receptionist, "Have you got a Gary Weir here?" And this man at a little desk, he overheard my voice and he said, "Yes, I'm Gary Weir." I said, You, Mr. Weir, the Chilung La, tell me, easy glacial walking leads to the pass, it says in your book." And Gary, in his lovely little chuckly voice, said, "I've never been there. Somebody told me that." Never believe a writer. Never believe what you read in a guidebook. Gary is now a dear friend of mine. That story about Bundanoon becoming the first bottled water-free town in the world became a big world story. On the day it happened, I did more than 200 interviews in 2 days with everybody from CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, everything. Big story around the world. But, you know, it was a good thing in a small town, and what I will say is one of the things that I was really impressed with last month when I was here is some of the efforts that are being made here in India to deal with the plastic problem. And about 2 days, last June, I was actually giving a TED talk in Athens, a talk called Message in a Bottle. And 2 days after I gave this talk was World Environment Day, in June the 5th. And many of you, of course, will know that World Environment Day had the theme this year, or last year, as Beat Plastic Pollution. And India hosted World Environment Day, and your Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, announced that by 2022, India would be single-use plastic free. Now that's a massive vision for such a huge country as India, the second most populous nation in the world. But it's a vision, and it's a vision I wish my country had, a big country but with 25 million people. And I don't doubt that India won't make that become single-use plastic free by 2022. But I know that you'll make a good effort to deal with the problem that you have. And, you know, as I say, last month I spoke to a lot of people when I was here, a lot of members of the association, and I was amazed at some of the great things being done by these operators in terms of not using bottled water, not using straws, not using, you know, shampoo in accommodations, just doing it in reusable containers, and many, many other things. And I didn't actually know, coming to the beautiful Arakuvalley until today, and I walked from the hotel I'm staying at down the road to here this morning and passed all these signs saying that the Arakuvalley is essentially trying to go plastic free. So please give everybody a round of applause who's involved in that with the government here, because it's a big problem, and you know, you guys have got to attack it as a government, state and national. But the government is important, but never underestimate that everybody here in this audience and everyone in this convention are the most powerful agents of change. You as individuals, and you as small companies, businesses. And we know that we have to kick the habit. We know that we must massively reduce the consumption of single-use plastics. And going back to connections, and a connection to plastic and a connection to the Himalaya. About 40 years ago, my Uncle Dan, who sadly passed away last year, aged 90, he gave me my first, when I was 16 years old in 1979, he gave me my first pile of second-hand outdoor equipment, an old stove, sleeping bag, a tent, and this orange plastic mug. And this orange plastic mug, I think, shows both the beauty and the problem of plastic, because it's been with me on every journey and every expedition over the last 40 years. It's been across the deserts of Australia. It's been around the Mediterranean for a year. It's been up Himalayan summits, and it's been taken to my lips and kissed more times than my beautiful wife has, I think, over that 40-year period. But I'd never want you to think, I mean, she's there on the summit with me of Kalanag with my plastic mug, the two loves of my life. But here I am, though, back in India for the second time in 2 months. I'm back to a country where there's always a warm smile, where there's always an offer of help. Back to a place that, yes, can be a little bit frustrating at times, but is always so totally compelling as a nation, as a, you know, for an outsider to come and visit, and a country that I feel honoured and blessed to have spent a good chunk of my travelling life. And I'm looking forward next week to going back up to Gulmarg to go skiing for the first time in 1987 and reconnecting again with the Himalaya. But this convention, the title is Future Challenges and Opportunities. And I don't suppose I've spoken really much about the future. I've spoken a fair bit about my history in this country, in my own adventures and elsewhere. But let me take you back one final time to 1987 and that first journey to the Himalaya, and the first time when I fell in love with this beautiful country. And I'm on the Beas River in a raft called Ganga. And I didn't really know how to whitewater raft. I'd done a bit of kayaking, but I didn't really know how to raft. But when I was skiing up in the Manali area, I met a tour operator who ran some treks. And I said, oh, it might be really nice to raft the Beas River. Looks quite good fun. Nice whitewater river. And he said, oh, well, Huw, we have a raft in Delhi. We've got a couple of rafts. I can get them brought up and you can go rafting down the Beas River. Okay. And I went away from Manali and I went up to Kashmir to do some ski touring and up to Gulmarg. And a few weeks later I came back to Manali and this tour operator said, Mr. Kingston, I've got the rafts ready for you. Do you want to go tomorrow? I have another man, he can go with you. He's done some rafting. So I thought, I don't know this river, but I was young and silly. I'll give it a go. What could go wrong? So the next day I went down to the bazaar in Manali and I met this tour operator and I met this other Indian man, and I also met 4 American tourists who he'd booked as clients for me to take down the river, on the Beas River. A river I didn't know, a man who didn't really know how to guide a raft. Anyway, I should have said no, but I'm not very good at saying no. So I said yes, and I was so scared all of the way down that day, because I didn't know what would happen if somebody went over the edge. How would I get them out of the water? Fortunately, things are very, very different here now. Captain Kumar talked about the adventure standards and the safety standards, but those are good times too when adventure happens like that, and luckily nobody was hurt. But it brings me from 1987 back to only a few weeks ago, and I was honoured to spend a few days rafting down the Ganga with Akshay Kumar and Dilshad Kumar and some of their guides. And on that river, as we were going down through one of the pools between the rapids, Akshay said to me, and of course Akshay's business was one of the first operators a long time ago on the Ganga River, and he said there's now 400 operators around the Rishikesh area on the Ganga. Now that might be good for tourism in some ways, it might be good for employment in some ways, but I think these are the sort of issues that relatively new destinations like Andrapradesh here have to learn from, is the problems that you can have with over-tourism and keeping control and looking after the beautiful places that people come to. Because the challenge, I think, for all of you is to take the opportunities without ruining those precious assets, to tread lightly where you can. You don't always need, when you have a trek or a rafting trip, to have dozens of porters and cooks and infrastructure. I mean, I know in India, labour is relatively cheap compared to, say, my own country, but you have to think about the impact on the environment of putting all of those people through, not just the tourists, but the support staff. Because wherever you go in the world, and India is no exception, tourism is a voracious, hungry beast, and it's prone to overeating. So be careful, be very careful how you build the menu, and choose wisely the ingredients that you use. We can't actually foretell the future, but I think we all know in our hearts that we need to make big changes in our lives and in our businesses if we're going to keep this spectacular little planet going. Everyone in this room has the power to drive the changes that aren't just necessary, but are essential. The adventure travel industry is, can, and must be the driver of positive environmental change in the travel and tourism industry. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so I think he deserves a big round of applause, and thank you so much, Mr. Kingston, for showing us India through your eyes and making it so special for us. And the narration was so beautiful. I haven't seen a more rapt audience, and I think we all enjoyed it, didn't we? Yes. So I'd now like to call upon on stage Mr. Vinayak Kaul, EC member, to present a token of respect to Mr. Huw Kingston. Can we have you here, Mr. Vinayak Kaul? He hasn't come yet? Deepika ma'am, can we have you? Thank you very much, and I hope we have a plastic-free India by 2022.
Thanks, Deepika. Thank you very much indeed.